The Wagon from Back East. The sun rose over the wide sweep of the Wyoming prairie, spilling gold across the rolling grasslands and painting the jagged ridges of the distant Rockies with a pale glow. Dust lingered in the air, stirred by the hoofbeats of a single horse making its way down the wagon trail. On the horse's back sat Jedediah Cole, Jed to his friends, though most just called him the Cowboy. At 31, Jed had spent the better part of his life working cattle, fixing fence lines, and breaking wild mustangs for the Triple C Ranch. His hands were scarred and brown, his shoulders broad from years of work, and his eyes were the color of a storm rolling across the plains. He was respected in town for his quiet nature, but folks whispered too, said he lived too long alone, that a man needed a woman's presence to soften him before solitude hardened him for good. Perhaps that was why Jed had done what he'd sworn never to do, answer one of those advertisements in the Denver papers. A mail-order bride, they called it. The thought had made him uneasy at first. But when he read the words penned in a careful, feminine hand, "I am a woman of good health and honest intention, willing to make a life out west with a hard-working man," something in him stirred. He wrote back. Letters passed between them all winter, and by spring she had agreed to come west. Her name was Clara Bennett, a schoolteacher from St. Louis. She was supposed to arrive on the westbound wagon today. Jed tugged on his reins as he crested the hill overlooking the town of Willow Creek. Below, the settlement stretched small and tidy against the endless horizon, a single street lined with false-front shops, a livery stable, a saloon with its swinging doors, and the white steeple of a church rising proud at the far end. And there, rolling slowly down the road, was the stagecoach, wheels creaking, horses snorting. Jed's heart gave a quick, unfamiliar thump. He was not a man prone to nervousness, but now he found himself adjusting his hat twice, brushing trail dust from his shirt. He guided his horse down the slope, boots hitting the ground just as the coach rattled to a halt in front of the depot. The door swung open. A woman stepped down, and Jed caught his breath. She was exactly as he had pictured Clara, slim but strong, with auburn hair braided beneath a straw bonnet, her traveling dress simple but clean. Her eyes were a bright hazel, warm and searching. She held herself with poise, though her cheeks flushed as she met Jed's gaze. But then, before Jed could take a step toward her, a second figure emerged. Identical. Another woman, the very mirror of the first, climbed down behind her, dusting off her skirts. Same auburn hair. Same hazel eyes. Same startled blush. The crowd at the depot murmured. Jed's horse stamped the dirt. And Jed himself stood rooted to the spot, staring at two versions of the woman he had been expecting. Clara, or was it Clara, spoke first. "Mr. Cole?" she asked softly, her voice carrying just enough to reach him. Jed tipped his hat. "Ma'am." His voice came rougher than he intended. His gaze flicked between them. "Forgive me, but which one of you is Clara Bennett?" The sisters exchanged a look, something private, filled with amusement, nerves, and maybe even mischief. The first one stepped forward. "I am Clara," she said. "And this," she gestured to the other, "is my twin sister, Cora." Jed's jaw tightened. A twin sister. The letters had said nothing about this. Cora offered a polite smile, though her eyes seemed sharper than Clara's, quick to take in everything, the cowboy, the town, the curious faces watching them. She curtsied slightly, though there was a glint of boldness in the gesture. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Mr. Cole. My sister wrote much of you, but she didn't say you were quite so tall." Jed shifted, feeling the stares of the townsfolk pressing in. He was not a man easily flustered, but this was something else. One bride he had expected. Two sisters, identical at that, he had not. "Miss Bennett," he said carefully to Clara, "I'm mighty glad you've come safe across the miles. But I reckon I'm a little surprised to see you both." Clara's cheeks colored deeper. "I should have explained in my letters. Forgive me, Jedediah. Cora. Well," She didn't want me to make the journey alone. She insisted. We've never been apart for more than a few days. Cora tilted her head. 2 are better than 1, don't you think, Mr. Cole? The cowboy's stomach tightened. Phew. Lord help him, he'd asked for 1 wife. He was not about to juggle the affections of twin sisters. Yet as he stood there, watching the way Clara's eyes softened and the way Cora's sparkled, he realized his life was about to grow far more complicated than he had bargained for. That evening, Jed escorted the sisters to the boarding house run by Mrs. Atkins. He carried their trunks inside, listening half to the chatter of the women and half to his own thoughts. Clara was gentle, grateful, her voice carrying the same honesty he'd felt in her letters. She thanked him often, even for the smallest courtesies. Cora, by contrast, teased him outright, making bold remarks about cowboys and the West. She laughed at the dust on his boots, at the way townsfolk stared at them. And yet, Jed felt drawn to both in different ways. Clara matched the woman he thought he knew. But Cora stirred something else: restlessness, curiosity, maybe even trouble. After supper, Jed tipped his hat and excused himself. As he walked back to the ranch under a rising moon, he muttered under his breath, "Jed Cole, what have you gotten yourself into?" The wide prairie gave no answer, only the lonely call of a night bird in the dark. Heart, 2 shadows. Morning broke with a pale orange sky stretching across the Wyoming plains. Jed Cole saddled his horse with the same steady hands he always used, but his mind wasn't steady at all. Sleep had eluded him the night before. Every time he shut his eyes, he saw 2 identical faces, Clara's soft smile, Cora's mischievous grin. A man who lived on the land liked things simple. Cattle needed water, fences needed mending, storms had to be faced head-on. But this... 2 women in the same house, one of them promised to him, the other staring at him with knowing eyes. This was more complicated than any stampede or prairie fire. By mid-morning, Jed found himself riding into town, hat low against the wind. He told himself he was just being polite, checking on the sisters, making sure their trunks had arrived from the depot. But truth be told, he couldn't stay away. At Mrs. Atkins's boarding house, he tied off his horse and stepped onto the porch. Through the lace curtains, he glimpsed Clara bent over a sewing basket, her auburn hair catching the morning light. Beside her, Cora leaned against the window frame, laughing at something the older widow had said. When Jed knocked, both women looked up. For the briefest second, his chest tightened. "Mr. Cole," Clara said warmly, standing at once. She smoothed her dress and met him at the door. "You're kind to call so soon." Cora raised an eyebrow from behind her sister. "Kind, or curious?" Jed cleared his throat. "Reckon it's both." He shifted his weight, trying not to let her teasing rattle him. "Thought I'd offer to show you both the ranch. Give you a feel for the life waiting out there." Clara clasped her hands together, eyes shining. "I'd be honored." Cora grinned. "And I'd be entertained." The ride out to the Triple C Ranch was long, the wagon wheels crunching over dusty ruts as Jed guided the horse team. Clara sat close, asking earnest questions about crops, cattle, and how far the schoolhouse stood from the ranch. Cora, on the other hand, stretched her arms wide, remarking on the wild beauty of the open plains. "It feels like the edge of the world," she said, tilting her face toward the wind. "Like anything could happen out here. Dangerous. Free." Jed tried not to notice how her words stirred something restless inside him. He reminded himself that Clara was the one he'd written to. Clara was the one who trusted him enough to cross 2,000 miles. When they arrived, the sisters marveled at the ranch house, a sturdy log home Jed had built with his own hands. Inside, Clara admired the neat shelves of books he'd collected over the years. "I didn't know cowboys were such readers," she said softly. Cora chuckled. "You should have seen his face when he first saw us. Words didn't come easy then." Jed shot her a look, but she only smiled wider. The days that followed stretched Jed thinner than he'd ever felt in his life. Clara helped Mrs. Atkins at the church, winning the hearts of townsfolk with her gentle ways. She sewed, she taught hymns to children, and she looked at Jed with a hopefulness that made his chest ache. Cora, however, was a whirlwind. She joined card games at the saloon, rode horses with the ranch hands, and once even dared to climb the windmill just to see the view. Every time Jed scolded her, she only laughed. "What's the use of being out west if I can't live a little?" And Jed, though he tried to resist, found himself smiling at her boldness more often than not. One evening, under the porch lantern, Clara sat with him in quiet conversation. She spoke of her dreams, of raising children with steady values, of building a schoolhouse where none stood. Jed listened, his heart warming. She was everything he had asked for in his letters. But later that same night, when he stepped outside to fetch water, he found Cora leaning against the fence, staring at the stars. "You don't belong to the land, Jed Cole," she murmured when she noticed him. "You belong to the sky. I can see it in you, the way you watch the horizon, as if you're chasing something more." He swallowed hard. "And what if I am?" Cora turned, her eyes gleaming. "Then don't settle for less than fire. Clara, she'll give you peace. But me, I'll give you storm." Jed's breath caught, and for a dangerous moment, he didn't know which he craved more. The tension grew unbearable. Clara noticed his unease, though she mistook it for shyness. One afternoon, she took his hand in hers. "You've been so patient with me, Jed. I know I'm a stranger here still, but I hope, in time, you'll let me be your wife not just in name, but in heart." Her sincerity tore at him. He wanted to answer, but Cora's shadow hovered too close. That night, as the town gathered for a barn dance, everything came to a head. The fiddles played lively tunes, lanterns swinging from the rafters. Jed escorted Clara, as was expected, and they danced slowly, carefully, her head against his chest. For a moment, he felt calm. But then Cora swept in, catching the eyes of half the young men in town. She laughed, she twirled, she shone. And when her gaze found Jed across the room, it burned with unspoken challenge. The townsfolk began to whisper. Some thought it scandalous, 2 sisters, 1 cowboy. Others found it amusing, placing quiet bets on which one he'd choose. Jed couldn't take it any longer. He led both sisters outside beneath the moonlight. "This has to stop," he said firmly, voice low but trembling with urgency. "Clara, you came here as my bride. Cora, you've made me question everything. But I can't, won't, play between you. One heart can't belong to 2 shadows." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she lifted her chin. "Then you must choose, Jed." Cora crossed her arms, though her bravado faltered. "Yes, choose." Silence fell, broken only by the wind sweeping the prairie grass. Jed looked from one to the other, his storm-colored eyes steady at last. "I wrote to Clara. I made a promise to Clara. And though, Cora, you've shaken me in ways I can't deny, I know a man is nothing if he doesn't keep his word." He turned fully to Clara, taking her trembling hands in his. "You're the woman I prayed for, Clara Bennett. If you'll have me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving it." Cora's breath hitched. For a heartbeat, her eyes blazed with something fierce, hurt, pride, maybe even love. But then she let out a shaky laugh. "Well, guess I'll have to find my own cowboy, then." And though she tried to sound flippant, Jed caught the glimmer of tears before she turned away. Clara pressed herself against him, relief washing over her. "Thank you, Jed," she whispered. "Thank you for choosing truly." Jed wrapped his arm around her, staring into the endless prairie night. He felt the ache of loss for what might have been, but deeper still, the steady comfort of the woman who had crossed half a continent to stand beside him. For a cowboy, storms were part of life. But at the end of every storm, the land needed rain. And Clara was his rain, gentle, patient, life-giving. And so, as the stars burned bright above Willow Creek, Jed Cole finally allowed himself to believe that the long wait was over. His bride was here. His home was full. And his heart, though tested, had chosen its keeper.